So in this most recent update that just came out a couple days ago, controller players got a whole new set of settings. And these are the gyro settings that allow you to actually aim just by moving your controller. I'm always hooking you guys up with some great normal control accessories, so in today's video, I'm gonna be showing you guys the best gyro controller settings. So for my hours of like testing and researching and understanding the new gyro settings, it seems like it's gonna be most useful for those medium to long range AR shots where you're gonna be tracking people as well as controlling recoil. Really, any sort of close range is not going to be good using the gyro. The biggest issue on controller that the gyro settings are solving is now giving controller players the ability to make super tiny adjustments. Making super tiny adjustments is typically really hard to do just with your thumbs, but by just being able to use hand movements, you're able to make such precise movements just with your hands. So let's hop into the first part of the gyro setting. Obviously, gyro aiming on. Now for these top two active mode combat and building settings, you really should copy these exact ones. You're definitely not gonna want to build or edit with gyro. Like I said, where it really helps is with that AR aim, so you're gonna want to have it on scope or aiming. I'll come back to this look stick effect in just a second. It depends on whether you're playing claw, paddles, or standard, but a good sensitivity that I found is right around 0.76. I found this a great speed for tracking, it's great for controlling recoil, and it's also great for being able to make like super tiny adjustments. Then vertical horizontal ratio makes sense to me to keep it at 1:1. The reason is that, again, the gyro is useful for tracking and controlling your recoil. Controlling your recoil is going to revolve around your vertical, and tracking is going to revolve around the horizontal. And both tracking and controlling the recoil need right about the same speed, so it doesn't make sense to have one higher than the other. Then right here, steadying doesn't matter because we have advanced gyro options on. We'll come back to acceleration, but I have that turned off. And then flick stick isn't something that I'm going to use and isn't something that I suggest anyone uses. Like I said, the gyro aim for controller is really only going to be useful in select few areas of aim. And if you turn on the flick stick, that literally means that you always have to use the gyro to aim. The only thing your right stick will be useful for is just flicking in the general direction of someone. So before we hop too far into the advanced gyro sensitivities, I want to go over to my binds because there's actually two new actions that you can bind. You can bind reset camera and gyro modifier. So here's my suggestion. If you play claw or paddles and you have an open bind that's comfortable to press while you're aiming, then set that bind to gyro modifier. So for example, I'm playing on the Scuff Impact, which has 4 paddles on the back, and this paddle right here that my thumb is on, I don't actually use it for anything. That's a paddle that I can easily click while I'm doing my normal aiming. If you play standard controller, odds are your L3 and R3, which are the 2 binds that you can press without moving your thumbs off the thumbsticks, are probably going to be taken up by like jump, edit, switch mode, something like that. So I suggest if you don't play claw or paddle, you have look stick effects set at disables. And then in your binds, you're not going to have a gyro modifier. And as for a reset camera, I don't really see the purpose there, so I'm not even going to bind it. But what this is doing for you no paddle, no claw players is when you're aiming with your right stick, the gyro is not affecting your aim. Now, when your thumb is off the stick, you can use the gyro. And then an advice that I would give to you no claw, no paddles players is try not to do any close range aiming using gyro. Anytime you're aiming close range, try to only aim with your right stick. One thing that I think you're really going to want to try to avoid is mixing the two. Using both like simultaneously is probably going to throw you off a ton. So especially for the players that don't use claw or paddles, your best bet is going to be to use your right stick to make the huge movement over to your target. And then once you're in the general direction of your target, then you take your thumb off the stick and use gyro to make those tiny corrections. And if you do use claw or paddles, we'll come back to that concept here in a sec because we have a couple other settings that we have to set. But before we get to those settings, we have the advanced gyro sensitivities. And for these settings, it doesn't matter whether you play claw, no claw, paddles, whatever. It literally doesn't matter. Your scope multiplier should be somewhere around double. Tracking with a scope in general is slower. So for your scope, you'll definitely want to have it at least double. Then for aiming multiplier, we can keep that at 1 because we're not going to be using any of the harvesting, building, or editing. So if you want to adjust the aiming gyro sense, then you just adjust the overall gyro sensitivity up here. Next, we have the advanced gyro orientation. I personally didn't notice the difference between local and player, but based on the descriptions that the game gives, you want to leave this on player. Then for all these directions on whether they're inverted or on standard, it really all comes down to personal preference. I prefer all mine on standard. It just makes sense to me in my brain that way. Do whatever makes sense to you and whatever feels comfortable, just don't have them disabled. Then we get to the advanced gyro filters, and here's what I have to say about these. I base all my aim settings around being consistent with my shots. My controller settings don't allow me to hit like insane flick shots. What they do allow me to do is rarely miss my shot. And I find the easiest way to be consistent is to have consistent settings. What I mean by that is every single time that I move my thumbstick to aim, it moves exactly based on how I move my right thumb. This is why on my normal control accessories, I don't use any boost and I don't play on exponential. If you use boost and play on exponential, that means sometimes sometimes your crosshair is going to be moving slower, sometimes it's going to be moving faster, and to me it makes it a lot less predictable and a lot harder to be consistent with your aim. And that's kind of how this acceleration, these smoothing hold times, and these tightening thresholds work. If you have these on and you're using Gyro, there's certain points where it's moving faster, there's certain points where it's moving slower, and the Gyro speed changes at different points. By turning all these off or as low as they can go, it resembles that linear feel where your gyro is the same every single time. And if you're aiming using Gyro, your crosshair is going to go exactly where you move your hands. There's no point where it's artificially speeding up or slowing down. If you move your hands fast, the crosshair is going to move fast. If you move your hands slow, the crosshair is going to move slow. To try to explain it a little better, imagine you're using a mouse. If you've ever used a mouse on a computer, which I'm assuming all of you have, you obviously drag the mouse exactly where you want it to go. And the only time it gets faster is when you're moving your hand faster, and the only time it gets slower is when you're moving your hand slower. So if you were to use this acceleration option, instead of the mouse going at the speed that your hand is moving, it's gonna start off slow, and then as it goes on, it's gonna get faster. And then with the smoothing and tightening thresholds, it's the same thing, but opposite. Those basically mean when you let go of the mouse, it's gonna continue to go for a little bit and smooth out to a slow stop. So instead of that like really snappy feel, you're gonna get like slow ramping, which I really don't like and most people don't like. It's way easier to be consistent and precise with that snappiness. It's really hard to explain these things, but I hope that made a little bit of sense. And for dead zone, the setting itself advises against using it, so I'm gonna have that set to the default 0. For filter controller vibration, this really shouldn't matter because over in your normal controller options, you should have vibration off, because especially when you're aiming with your thumbs, if your controller is vibrating and moving, that can obviously throw off your aim. So vibration in general should be off, which means that option shouldn't matter, and just to be safe, you can turn it off. Now for the advanced gyro options, here's where we come back to you claw and paddles players. If you play standard controller, if you don't play claw or paddles, you want to have these set to do nothing. If you do play claw or paddles and you set a gyro modifier, you want to have both these set to disable gyro. What this allows you to do is basically give you a toggle on gyro, which means when you're holding down that gyro modifier bind, which like I said earlier, I have set to my paddle, that means gyro is not active on my controller and I can turn that off or on whenever I want. So if you play claw or paddles and you set a gyro modifier, you'll also want to have look stick effect at nothing, because your look stick effect doesn't matter when you literally have a bind set to toggle that. And that's why I said it needs to be comfortable, because when you're aiming, you're gonna have to be able to click this on a dime and not mess up your aim. And then I explained why you no claw, no paddles players should have this on disable. I explained that earlier. If you're interested at all in the trackball features, they're really bad. So no claw, no paddles, set these to do nothing. If you have claw or paddles, set these to disable gyro. Your gyro button hold time doesn't matter unless you're using the gyro modifier bind with one of these bottom three, which I really wouldn't suggest. If you have an open bind, then just set that to only gyro modifier. So if you have gyro modifier set to a single bind, then that really doesn't matter. You can put it all the way down just to be safe. Trackball sucks, so we're not using that. You can set that to 0 if you want, and driving disables gyro doesn't really matter because we're only using it when we're scoped in and aiming. It'll be interesting to see if these gyro settings are something sort of like sliding, where sliding isn't really used in fights like people thought it would be. Instead, now sliding is just sort of like a movement rotation tool. This gyro aim is going to be a huge learning curve, so it'll be interesting to see if it sticks. I'm personally not sure if I'm going to try to use this or not. I'm definitely going to give it a fair shot and test it for like a full week, and I will definitely have an update video on that, so if you don't want to miss that, then definitely subscribe to the channel. But I do want to show off my normal controller settings alongside my gyro settings, because that just makes sense. That way it's all my controller settings. So on build and edit, I have 2.1. On look sense, I have 43 with no boost. On ADS, I have 8. No ADS boost. I have no look damaging time. I play on linear. In dead zones, I use 10-10. But if you're curious or have any input on any of these gyro settings, then definitely drop a comment. Otherwise, I really hope this video helped you, and I hope to catch you in a future one.